Yep.
Yes. Hi, Haroon. This is Dr. Ujjal. Uh, I'm in the English department here in Guru Nanak Dev University. So we are very fond of your books. I have read Search of Shiva, and here I have the copy also. And this one, Walking with Nanak, I am reading. I haven't finished it yet, but yes, half of it partially I have read. So it's really a great pleasure to have you here. Our students are very excited to meet you, to listen to you. So
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
over to Ratandeep.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining in this literary club discussion of this book, which I have From Waris to Heer by Haroon Khalid. Uh, so Haroon basically has an academic background in anthropology, has written 4 books before, and 2 of them I'm already mentioned: In Search of Shiva, Walking with Nanak, Imagining Lahore, and he's out with this new book, From Waris to Heer, which we'll talk about today. So Haroon, thank you so much for taking your time and speaking.
Thank you. Yeah, should I start?
Yeah. So before we start, actually, with the Q&A, we were just thinking of starting with a passage from the book. Probably if you could read. I was talking to Haroon and I was telling my favorite chapter is the chapter 4, which he talks about how love actually plays an important role in that central element. And probably you can start with that and can demystify how probably Heer Ranjha is more than just a love story.
Absolutely. So I think I'll give a bit of a context, because when we think about Heer Ranjha and we think about Waris Shah, like the first thing you think about is love, and of course that's how Bollywood has sold Heer Ranjha to us. But I feel like that's actually a gross misrepresentation of what Heer Ranjha is. I feel like Heer Ranjha is such a complex story. It's like there's so many layers. So just to think about it, to think of it as a love legend is really to render it's to render sort of disservice to what this complex literature is. It is philosophical, it is political, it is historical, it is autobiographical, it is so much more. So in this book, essentially what I wanted to talk about the love part of it, but also like bring about the broader political context that Waris Shah was responding to, and what is the religious sort of sensibility around that time that he's responding to. What is part of his philosophical tradition? So Heer Ranjha, you can also read of it as really a philosophical book, as a mystical book, as a book on religion almost. So people have already said that about Pakistan में काफी चीज के बारे में मशहूर है कि वो कहते हैं कि अगर आपने कुरान नहीं पढ़ा तो that's fine, you can read Heer Ranjha and you will understand what Islam is all about. So it's very interesting that people think about Heer Ranjha in that religious, and that's not true for just Muslims. Like you find that within Sikhi, within Hinduism. So Punjabi religious उसके अंदर काफी इसकी importance है. So this chapter that I'm reading is essentially, it's called The Season of Love, and it's about describing Bahar in Basant, जो आजकल का मौसम है, so it's very apt. But just sort of also like talking about the literary aspect of what I'm trying to do is कि अगर हीर रांझा अगर आप पढ़ें तो उसके अंदर वारिस शाह मौसमों को बड़ी खूबसूरती से जो है वो डिस्क्राइब करता है, मुख्तलिफ मौसम को, times of the day को. So they really capturing the essence of Punjab in that way. So I wanted to pay homage to that tradition a bit. So इसलिए थोड़ा सा मैंने वो मौसम के ऊपर से मैंने उसको एक experimental तरीके से लिखा है. So I'm going to read that part of it. So this chapter is called The Season of Love. There was a pattern to its insanity. In the dead of night, it would roam the winding streets of Kasur, howling and cursing, banging loudly on the wooden windows and doors, its sound resonating in the empty lanes. No one would respond to its cries. Shivering under thick blankets, they would pray for the demon to disappear. But it never did. It would get even bolder in the summers, roving across the city through its labyrinth passages in the broad daylight when the sun was at its peak. It would sing songs of seduction. In a state of mania, it would be at its charismatic best. For the unacquainted, there was a lure in these songs. Sometimes they would step out through the door or peep from a window, searching for something that was never there. The majority, however, were aware of these seasonal patterns. They shut themselves up in their homes, waiting for the madness to pass, so that they could step out after that. It was only in the season of love that it was truly accepted. It would run through the streets, racing with the children who were chasing one another. All the doors and windows would then be opened and it would be allowed to enter and stay for as long as it liked, sometimes even through the night, passing through the street corners where the men usually gathered through the day. It would be smiled at, embraced, and welcomed. In the courtyard, where women got together for spinning, It would sit along with them, sharing with them stories from the street. In the open ground, known as Khula Maidan, in the heart of the city, it would dance like a dervish, partaking of that special drink of the jogis and malang, bhang. It would whirl uncontrollably, inebriated, marching from one corner to another. It would carry in its hands colors, the brightest in the world, and blow them onto every passerby. For these couple of weeks, it was forgiven all trespasses. It was forgiven all sins. It was the season of Bahar, the season of Basant. It was a season of intoxication, majestic spring. The thick blankets everyone had worn through the dry killer winter were now shunned, revealing the dyed, colorful clothes. There were smiles on everyone's faces, seduction in everyone's eyes. It was a season of lovers, of faces, a season of lovers, of blooming hearts and secret rendezvous. It was the shortest season in the year. Flowers grew in the most unexpected of places, in between the cobblestones on the paved streets, sprouting from walls, and even from the corners of the drain. It was a season when everything was in moderation: the cold, the heat, the length of the day, and the depth of the night. Everything except people's behavior. Even those who never consumed it had some bhang, while others enjoyed wine. There was an unlimited supply of fruits and food for a never-ending appetite. I think I'll end there, Ratnadeep.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, especially the way you have described not just characters, but also the setting on which the characters are actually interacting. That's really interesting. And I actually want to start with that part because in the very prologue of the book, you talk about this concept of Issa writing, where the originality takes a backseat to retelling stories with new symbols. So could you tell how did this influence your approach to crafting a retelling of Veer Ranja, a story which is all known to a lot of our audience probably here?
Absolutely. So I think so when I started thinking about writing Heer Ranja, I mean Waris Shah's Heer Ranja, um, like one question that I grappled with was like, how do you tell a story that is already known? So I mean, for example, like, even if you've never known the story, like you can still read the book and learn about the story. But my question था कि Heer Ranja is such a popular story within Punjab, and you know the ending, you know the basics. कि ये होता है, they will fall in love, eventually they will die, whatever. So my point was that how do you tell a story that is already known, and how do you make it engaging for people and audience and everything? So that was my starting point to how the novel started. But but the more I got into it, and I realized कि Heer Ranja, कि Waris Shah actually is like maybe the fourth or the fifth person in Punjabi who's writing Heer Ranja. और उसके कंटेम्प्रेरीज थे एक्चुअली तीन चार जिन्होंने हीर रांझा भी लिखी थी अराउंड द सेम टाइम और उससे पहले ऑफ कोर्स सूफी पोएट्री के अंदर शाह हुसैन uses this a lot, Bulle Shah uses this Heer Ranja का concept a lot. So this is a very established symbol. Like Waris Shah is not creating new characters, he's not telling a new story. And I think this allowed me to understand the genre of kissa more deeply. That because हमारा especially in the modern sort of literature and novel writing के साथ एक आया है, the idea is the focus has always been on the originality. Like do you have anything original to tell? Is it a new story? Is it an unknown story? And I feel like we still are very much part of that tradition. But kissa, if we needed to understand the riwayat that kissa was, which is very much part of pre-colonial literary tradition, is that there's no focus on originality. Everyone knows the story. So the point is that can you retell a story in a way that still makes sense to the audience, that somehow in that retelling of a story that somehow tells you something new about the political context, about the environment. So in many ways, Waris Shah is responding to that. I feel like आपको उसके अंदर बहुत से political आपको aspects मिलते हैं कि अहमद शाह अब्दाली की invasion भी हो रही है. He talks about Nadir Shah. He talks about Sikh missiles. There's a lot of things. So you actually get a good sense of history. I was talking to Ishwar Gordi about the research while researching about the book, and he talked about how we don't think about pre-colonial literature as sources of history, and they're very much sources of history. And I think that was very much where I was coming from.
And when you do something like a kissa writing, the boundaries between the author, the story, as well as the characters, especially in a story like Heer Ranja, often blurs. And often at one time when I'm reading the book, it's very difficult to understand when the author steps in and when Waris Shah speaks. Was it kind of intentional, and how do you maintain this complex relationship when you're writing a novel like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So एक जो चीज so this is, I mean, and it's a very experimental kind of writing, and something that I really enjoyed in doing. So I think एक चीज जो थी कि So there's two parts of the book. So one is Waris Shah's part, and that's the historical fiction of what is happening to Waris Shah, and the other is him writing Heer Ranjha. Now, Varisha's part is, I feel like it's more straightforward, it's more linear. Like there's the narrative, there is a narrator, which is kind of me, but unknown, who's telling the story of what's happened to Varisha. But in the Heer Ranjha part of the story, that's where the experimental writing comes in a lot. So Heer Ranjha are self-aware. Like all the characters in this book are self-aware. They know that they are being written, and they know that they have a certain role to play in the story, and they play that role. So they're like very aware of those. And because they're self-aware, they are not bounded by the story, so they can even like go beyond the story. They can go beyond chronology. So वो एक बड़ा experimental तरीके से उसमें से था. And I think Kissa writing also does that, like because the idea that because Waris Shah once again was writing the Kissa not to just tell the story, but he wanted to make comments about politics, about religion, about gender, and I feel like he was making these characters speak. So sometimes अगर आप वो किस्सा पढ़ते हैं, and अगर आप if you go through that modern sensibility के एक story होगी, एक plot होगा, वो यहाँ से शुरू होगा, यहाँ पे खत्म हो जाएगा, वो नहीं होता. It goes all over, and I feel like I mean of course even in Indian like traditional literature, Hindu literature में आपको बहुत मिलता है. Mahabharata, for example, is full of this. के story doesn't end and start here; it goes everywhere. And I feel like Waris Shah is very much part of that tradition as well. And I think this is something I wanted to do. So they give you lessons about history, they give you lessons about gender, they give you lessons about religion, and so on. So those self-aware characters were very much part of that. So they're self-aware, they are not bound by chronology. You can almost think of them as having reincarnation, that they are reincarnated in multiple forms. Abhi wo Waris Shah ki mein incarnated hain. And in some ways, they're also aware that they are being written by me. So I think एक और symbolism का उसको देखें. I mean, there's also symbolism between divinity and divine, between devotee and the divine. That a devotee, like humans, know that they are created by a divine. So it's almost like the self-awareness, this free will that comes with being created. And I feel like within the novel, I'm also playing with that symbol, that these characters that are self-aware are very reflective of human condition, of being alive and having free will and knowing that a divine is creating them. A divine which is aloof almost.
And since we are talking about Waris Shah, it's important because a lot of times when we hear the story of Heer Ranjha, we just know them as characters who have played a very important role in the Punjabi folk tradition. But when we look at Waris Shah, a lot of part of Waris Shah's historicity, or even knowing a little bit about Waris Shah, is apparently missing from the mainstream literature. Was it very in the sense of your doing to make sure that you put across the story of Waris Shah purposefully to build across a certain amount of socio-political context of that period missing, because his ideas during that time also played a very important role while you're writing the story?
Yeah. So Waris Shah, like we actually have very limited knowledge of Waris Shah. Like we only have basics about where he comes from, what's the name of his parents, and where he was educated briefly, which is Kasur, and then where did he write this love story. Like that's all we know about Waris Shah. It's like very basic facts. So there's nothing much. So a lot of the work that is happening in the book is purely creation, is purely fiction in that way. But there's a couple of things that I wanted to do. Like firstly, I wanted to show that somebody like Waris Shah, and then you connect it to somebody like Bulleh Shah, somebody like Guru Nanak, somebody like, these historical characters who are poets, who are literary giants in our tradition. Like they were very, very well read. Like we have to really understand them as people who could speak multiple languages. Like Waris Shah, for me, how I understood was that he was aware of multiple languages. He could speak Farsi, he could speak Arabic, he could speak Sanskrit, he could speak Punjabi, and so on. And then they made a political choice to do their literature in Punjabi, which is the language of the masses. And I think that itself tells you about their politics. So आप उससे वो guess कर सकते हैं कि उनकी politics क्या होगी, उनकी sensibilities क्या होगी. Like he could, because there were people around that time, and I made that reference to Shah Waliullah, for example, that there were people around that time who were also intellectual giants, but writing in still Arabic or Persian or the elite language. So Waris Shah is not doing that. So that tells you about where he is politically. I think that was something that I was thinking about. I think एक और चीज थी जो थी कि especially अगर हम आज के लिहाज से if you think about madrasas, like think about madrasas as being hotbed of terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, militancy, and so on, which unfortunately is true in many ways, but it's also more complex. But it's still, but like madrasas are not known now. They're not known for their intellectual vibrancies. Like that's not where a lot of intellectual conversations are happening. But that was not true pre-colonial in the pre-colonial era. Like Waris Shah's his experience of madrasa must have been very, very intellectually stimulating. And this is madrasa education at that point meant that you are exposed to multiple traditions. So you are exposed to Greek philosophy, you are exposed to Hindu mythology, you know about Guru Nanak, you know about vernacular poetry that's happening around you. So I think एक मेरा वो भी focus था कि I wanted to talk about कि वारिस शाह की जो world है, especially the madrasa, is very much is sort of very different from how we imagine madrasa today, and that was something that I wanted to write about. And finally, I think एक जो so this is, I mean, of course, there's एक वारिस शाह के साथ एक पंजाब में एक रवायत जोड़ी जाती है कि he was in love, that he was in love with this woman and Bhagwari, and he wrote Heer Ranjha in that love legend. उसके ऊपर actually एक movie भी है, Punjabi movie भी है. But that's all. Like that's and of course, like we don't know historically that's true or not true. So there was something. I mean, so when I first heard that story, like I think that's really where the first idea of the book came from. That I wanted to show that Barisha was in love, and he wrote this book. He wrote this sort of Heer Ranjha kissa based in love. But I think when I started writing and doing research on Heer Ranjha, it became much more than that. So there is a part of love that Barisha falls in love, and he sort of is tributing Heer Ranjha to her, but there's so much more that is happening in his life. So that's part as well. But it's all folklore, it's all legends. We don't know historically if it's true or not, but it's all just part of the folk legend.
And I want to plug in the question, bringing a little bit about your previous books, that you have always explored the composite culture of Pakistan, especially when the news is all about how majoritarianism fuels divide. Heer Ranjha is a story where we see that it connects beyond a particular religion. It connects people of different faith, and sometimes people who do not even have a faith. It connects them somewhere or the other. How does that fit in today's socio-political context, and how much of that did you put in your thought process while you're writing this story?
Yeah, I think it's something that's naturally evolved in my writing. Like, I mean, I don't think I went in there when I started writing thinking about composite culture, but I think it just drew me in. Like, and I think increasingly, I think I've become more aware of it. I think Heer Ranjha's this book is very much part of that. Like, I really, because when we think about tradition, when we think about going back to history and going back to our roots, and I feel like that is exploited so much by demagogues, by right-wing politicians on all sides of the border, that this is not our tradition, this is not our rewayat, it has to go back to, and the idea is that you actually, what you are calling tradition is very much colonial construct. And if you go beyond colonialism, and if you think back to even pre-colonial literature, which Barisha is very much part of, it is so beautiful and it's so composite. And I mean, for example, like what is so special about Barisha's Heer Ranjha is that he beautifully quotes Quran on one line, and then he quotes Gita on the next line. He compares Ranjha to Prophet Yusuf, and then in the next line he would compare Ranjha to Krishna. And I think finally, what I also something that really I learned more while I was writing and reading the book, like the second half of the book, when he gets married and Ranjha becomes a jogi. Like, so firstly, like him becoming a jogi is very much part of the Shivaistic tradition. Jogi and Shiva and asceticism. So Varisha and is very much aware of that. So you can say that your Ranjha is Yusuf, but your Ranjha is also Krishna, and then your Ranjha is also Shiva when he becomes a jogi. But then when Heer is trapped when she's married, and in the second half of the story is Ranjha trying to save her. Like this is very much responding to Ramayana, the tradition of Ramayana, and in that way, like Varisha is very aware of those. And his audience is very aware of that. Like his wife, his spiritual wife, is trapped in this house of a demon, and Ranjha has to go and rescue her. So in that way, he's very much Ram. And in today's time, and like I think about this increasingly in today's time, like I think it's absolutely extraordinary that you have this most iconic. Like Ranjha is the most iconic Muslim Sufi symbol. Heer and Ranjha are the most iconic Sufi Muslim symbol in poetry, in literature, and in spirituality of South Asia, of Punjab. And that symbol comes from Ram. That symbol comes from Krishna, and of course other traditions as well. Like I feel like that is such a mind-boggling fact in today's understanding of politics. I don't think we really can understand like what a beautiful composite culture that was, that really borrowed from each other, and so absolutely no contradiction. Like nobody called Varisha kafir. Like that, just like, I mean, people are saying that Heer Ranjha is, if you can't read Quran, you can read Heer Ranjha and you can understand what Islam is. Like that's, people still say that about Heer Ranjha in Punjab, in Pakistan today, and that Heer Ranjha has Gita, has Mahabharat, has references to Ramayana and so many other literary traditions, and that I find absolutely incredible.
So while I go to the next question, I'm sure that a lot of you will have questions. So probably you can put it in the chat box, or in about 10 minutes, we'll open the floor and you can start asking the questions to Haroon. So probably get your questions ready. Uh, but while I move to the next question, I actually want to take it a little forward and ask you about the idea of Sufism that flows through the Heer Ranja story. And we have spoken about the concept of divine love. And we look at Sufi poetry often uses this metaphor of earthly love to express the seeker's longing for the divine. And often, Heer Ranja, we do not compare that Sufism because it's mostly transcended as a form of earthly love. But how much of that difference have you probably differentiated in the book of the earthly love versus the divine love, especially in a story like Heer Ranja?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and I feel like it requires. So I think my understanding of Varisha's interpretation of divinely love and earthly love, I think evolved as I was writing the books. I think I was getting more, and I have to give a bit of context. Like I have some background in philosophy. I was teaching philosophy at a high school, so there was some knowledge that I was bringing in there from there as well. And I feel like, okay, so here's the thing. I think if you think about, so Varisha is very much part of the Bhakti tradition, of which Bulle Shah is and Guru Nanak is, and I feel like at its core, like what Bhakti literature and Varisha does is moves away from metaphysics. So for them, the most important thing is what is happening in this life, in this world. And I feel like Varisha, for example, like Varisha is the first person who ends Hiranja at their death. Nothing happens after, and I think that really shows what his philosophy is. कि भाई, what is important is this world. We don't know about next world. We don't know कि Jahannam hai, dozak hai, kya nahi hai, and Varisha is not even concerned about it, even though he makes those spiritual references. So what I'm trying to say is that essentially it's a very materialistic philosophy, and it brings like so even though there's a distinction between earthly love and spiritual love, I feel like Varisha at its core doesn't differentiate between the two. कि अगर spiritual love है, so essentially spiritual love है वो earthly love ही है, and earthly love is spiritual love. So two people loving, essentially Varisha would respond in a way that that is what divine is. That divinity is not an existence that exists outside of this relationship. Like so earthly love is spiritual love, and spiritual love and earthly love are all together. There's nothing. So essentially the idea that kuch love, some love is forbidden, जो कुछ love जो है वो allowed है, कुछ love allowed नहीं है. Like Varisha is very much challenging that idea, and even Bhakti philosophy, Bhakti tradition challenges that idea. If even in some tradition, you see Krishna Radha challenging that idea that love can exist outside of marriage, and outside the societal bounds. So I think for Varisha, like there is no distinction between earthly love and divine love. Like they're all together. Nothing is illegitimate. No desire is illegitimate. And once you discover the truth of that, that is spirituality. That's truth, and that's divinity.
And if we take a little ahead and ask you of when we seek, for example, in the path of love or spirituality, both of them have a certain transformative effect as an individual person. Probably in the story, if you could explain how Heer and Ranja both had a little bit of a transformation in this process of either divine love or the earthly love, as we're talking about. And what was your transformation while you're writing this?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to use an example of Greek philosophy, थोड़ा सा इसमें, because Plato, especially Socrates' की philosophy और वो सारा, and Varisha is like Islamic philosophy is very much inspired by that Greek philosophy. So Varisha is very much aware of that tradition. उसके अंदर वो Plato का एक allegory of cave है, और उसके अंदर वो कहता है essentially कि once you discover divinity, you're transformed, and if you're not transformed after a divine encounter, then you never discover divinity. Like divinity, like essentially when you discover divine, then you're transformed. So एक वो बड़ा simple सा, so that's the background that sort of helps. अच्छा, जब मैंने Varisha, एक मैंने film देखी पहले, बहुत Pakistani film, then I also read the book. And if you read it from a romance point of view, like it's actually pretty shitty romance in many ways. Sorry for my language, but the idea is that like he goes and she's very angry at Ranja because he's sleeping at her couch and she has no idea who Ranja is, and she goes and then she's about to hit him and then she sees him and suddenly she's like, oh my god, I'm in love. Like that's and the idea that that's not really a human experience. But अगर आप उसको philosophy के लिहाज से देखें, spirituality के लिहाज से देखें, so the idea is that Ranja, I mean, is a character, but Ranja is also a symbol of divine, and Heer is a character, but he is also a symbol of a devotee. Now suddenly the devotee is experiencing divine. And that's like Prophet Moses experiencing divine on Mount Sinai, or essentially that's a divine experience. And as soon as that happens, she gets transformed. And I think that's what Waris Shah. So it's not. So if you think about it from a romance point of view, I feel like the story doesn't do justice to it. Like you have to understand the philosophical tradition that Waris is part of. Like so that is like so वो भी एक and even that, and then also जब मैं पहले बात कर रहा था कि experimental nature. Like so in the second writing of Hiranja, like the characters are characters but also symbols, and they flow between these two worlds, and you have to really hold that contradiction. So I mean you have to like, so that's why like maybe reading a novel, this novel, like it takes you a while to really get used to what is happening, because these are these two worlds that are happening together. So Ranja character hai, but Ranja symbol bhi hai, and then suddenly he has had this divine encounter, and suddenly she's transformed. And when she's transformed, all her previous identity is gone. Suddenly she's a new human being. Like everything, every other relationship that mattered to her becomes irrelevant, because now she has seen that truth, and that truth is divine. So that's the transformation. I think that the transformation for me while writing this book, um, I think it's very hard to say, but I feel like just like maybe like understanding the depth of it. I did a lot of research while writing the book and before writing the book, but I think even like while writing, so एक वो बड़ी interesting चीज किताब में भी है. I think this part of philosophy as well. And Ibn Arabi जो है उनकी philosophy है, and that's part of the Waris Shah's riwayat and tradition, is that when you read one book over and over and over again, you discover new truths about it every time. And it was very interesting कि I mean, I wrote the book in many ways, so I almost knew what I was trying to do. And then even though like I read it like 10, 15 times before it eventually went for publication and then came back. And I mean, I don't think I've read after, but like before that process. And it was a very strange moment that every time I was reading it, I'm like, whoa, like already. So this is also symbolism that's happening that I didn't really think about consciously, but now it's happening. So for example, like one thing that happened was that the book starts at violence. And the entire city is participating in that violence in some ways, and then the book ends at violence, and in many ways the entire city is participating in that violence. And suddenly I'm like, oh my god, like I didn't realize I was doing this, but it somehow the whole cycle of violence is completed. And I don't know, so there's these new things that were just coming, even the symbolism that I talked about, like self-aware characters and them being symbols, and them being symbols of human existence. I feel like that's something that I essentially realized about the book maybe like 5, 6 times after I read it. So there were like these new things that were coming about the book constantly.
And when you look at it from a larger perspective, and if you connect the larger Sufi tradition, for example, Rumi's poetry, even Rumi, for example, mentioned that the only boundary that you create to seek love is the one that you create yourself. And both of them had this certain significance of sacrifices, both Hiranja's story and Rumi's poetry. How much of that has played importance when we look at the personal sacrifices that the characters have to make from today's point of looking at or seeking love?
Yeah, I mean, sacrifice. I feel like the biggest sacrifice in love that happens, that Waris is talking about, is just giving up your former self, like this transformation that we were talking about. That you have to sacrifice your previous identity. You have to sacrifice. Like I mean, once like the encounter with divinity, and that's how he's saying, he's describing love. Like love is a divine experience. So once you encounter divinity, essentially everything else, like you have to be ready, because everything else will become irrelevant. Like your daily chores, your daily life, your daily interaction, and like nothing of that matters. So essentially you are sacrificing yourself almost in that process. So और उसमें फिर अगर आप देखें कि जो सूफी symbolism है, especially सोनी माहिवाल की स्टोरी के अंदर बहुत ज्यादा मिलता है आपको, कि वो घड़ा, the idea of घड़ा, कि घड़ा जो है अगर वो पक्का घड़ा नहीं है, वो कच्चा घड़ा है. So essentially if you're not ready to take that divine journey, then you are like that kacha ghada that you will drown in Janab. So you have to be able to transform and sacrifice. So it's more about sacrificing anything else. It's about sacrificing yourself. Like everything you hold dear, everything that you hold dear will become irrelevant. Like Heer is absolutely in love with her father, but that relationship becomes irrelevant once she has been transformed. Now, once again, that's not a human experience, but this love is very much a symbolism of the divine love. And I'm saying that they both, of course, are interconnected. But that's the biggest. I feel like that's the biggest sacrifice that's part of this love.
And often, when we look at the characters of Heer and Rancha, we get so much attached because of either the Bollywood influence or the pop culture reference that of how love stories should be written and told. Uh, Often, at times, there is a question, and a lot of might have that question about the not historicity of Warisha, but the characters of Heer and Rancha. How much of historical characters they are included? Are they real people?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. Interestingly, like I mean, that's a question. So my mom, for example, asked me this question when I told her I was writing this book. I think my dad also asked me this question. So there's a lot of people, like my friends, my family, have, as soon as I told them I'm writing this book, asked me this question. Um, so there's a couple of ways to answer that question. So firstly, like Ranja, the tribe, is there. So there is a tribe called Ranja in Punjab, especially around Chenab, and Takht Hazara is also a real village. In fact, my ancestral village is very close to Takht Hazara. So I'm also from a very similar region. So I've even been to Takht Hazara like a long time ago as a child. And similarly, Seal is also a tribe, and they were around Jhang, and Jhang is of course a real city as well. और उसके अलावा फिर of course there is a हीर रांझा का मज़ार भी है झंग में जहाँ पे लोग जाते हैं and they actually believe that the story is true. So I mean, but of course, like as we were talking about earlier, like just a mazar itself, because like mazars can have very complex history. So mazar itself is not evidence that this is a real story. But mazar बाद में वैसे भी बन जाते हैं on multiple reasons. And then qabr is जो है वो बाद में बनाई जाती है. But I feel like, okay, like here's a simple way to answer this question. I feel like to search for the veracity of these characters, I feel like it's unfair because these are not even characters. Like they are a moral lesson. They're meant to be a spiritual lesson. And I feel like it is like the story, and I think I write that in the book as well at the end. Like it is a story which is even truer than these characters, because I think what Warisha is very much talking about is honor killing. And gender violence, I feel like, is a very, very important part of the story. And gender violence existed around the time that Warisha lived, before him, and even today in Punjab and in many parts of India, like gender violence exists. Like people who decide to marry out of their own will experience violence and are killed. So we still have those boundaries of forbidden love, and I feel like Varisha is very much responding to that. And I feel like Heer, like if you think about her if you think about her as a character, like we lose what Varisha was doing and what Hiranja is all about. It is a symbol, and it's a symbol. It is a symbol of a truth which is unfortunately very much alive in our societies. So in that way, I think of it as a very, very true story because it is responding to something which is very true in our societies. So like for me, like it's irrelevant to find out if they were actually real characters or not, because there are many Heels and there are many Ranjas who experience that kind of violence every day, every year in our parts of the world. And I feel like that for me is really the truth of the story. So more than, like, for me, I'm not even interested anymore if Heer and Rancha are real stories, because for me they are real. They represent a truth which is beyond these characters.
So a few last questions, and probably after that I'll open it up. And you briefly touched upon the gender part, and this is what I wanted to ask you, because one of the evident themes that have emerged when I was reading your book was Heer as a character challenging the traditional gender norms of that period. So did Waris want Heer as a character, a representation who challenges the gender norm during that period of time? And as we're talking about the gender parity that existed in society that time, especially in Punjab that time. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things. Like, I feel like even if today, like rural Punjab, like I grew up. I mean, I didn't grow up in rural Punjab. Like I used to go there. Like I have my ancestral village, and a lot of my family members lived in rural Punjab. And I feel like now that I think about back to it, like gender roles in rural Punjab in many ways were very different from how you expect gender roles to exist in urban centers. Like for example, rural Punjab, like there was just more like flexibility with gender, like interaction between different genders and more fluidity. But I think more than that, I feel like our understanding of gender is very much a product of colonial era. I think how we understand gender today, how we understand norms and behavior, and I feel like at some level, like more than challenging gender norms of their time, what Hiranja does for us is that it gives you a view perhaps of what pre-colonial gender gender roles looked like. And I feel like they were much more fluid. They were much more sort of different from how genders have evolved. And I'll give you an example. Like I was watching this Pakistani movie a few years ago, and it had a reference to Ranja. And of course, Punjabi film thi, to Ranja ka reference to dalna hi hota hai. I feel like every other movie will have a reference of Ranja here, especially love story. And usme, like Ranja, and his idea of Ranja was that he's gonna go and like fight and maybe like hate a few people. And I was like, that's such a weird understanding of Ranja, because that's not really what Ranja is. Like if you actually interact with the symbol of Ranja, and Ranja as a gender, like Ranja is very soft. Like Ranja is very feminine. In fact, agar hum feminine us tarah se baat kare, in fact, he comes across as a masculine character. Like she acts violently, she defends Ranja, and she's out there to wage a war for her love. Whereas Ranja is more like passive. He's like, I don't know what to do. Okay, you know what? You take my rights, fine, whatever. Like Ranja is not going to rebel. He's not really a fighter. So he's not really. So in our understanding of masculinity today, like Ranja does not fit anymore. Any like he does not like doing work. He likes music. So he's very feminine. Like he's known for his beauty. Like you have a male character like Ranja. Like Heer ki beauty ki baat hoti hai, but Ranja like him like he is the ultimate symbol of beauty, and Heer is short there, but Ranja is more so. So in many ways, like it gives you this very alternative, and I feel like more than challenging the culture of his time, it actually reflects that our understanding of gender, pre-colonial understanding of gender, was actually much more different from how it has evolved. And I know that's like, I mean, we know that's like some of the colonial writers writing about South Asia, for that matter, was like one of the criticisms of South Asian men was that they're too feminine, that they're too, like they just like they like dancing, they like music, and they have earrings, they have long hair, whatever. Like so there was a lot of criticism of South Asian men not being masculine enough. And now, of course, like our understanding of masculinity is very much part of that macho Sanjay Dutt 90s kind of masculinity that has evolved. And that's very much part of the colonial idea of masculinity, this Victorian idea of masculinity. I think Hiranja allows us to view that gender roles were actually different. Like our idea of traditional gender roles, especially in Punjab, are different. So more than challenging gender roles of their time, I feel like it actually gives you a better understanding of maybe gender roles were more fluid and more flexible than how they've evolved today.
So lastly, I wanted to understand that the legacy of Heer and Ranja, especially any kind of folk tradition or customs that have in Punjab, and I can also speak for Bengal as well, because where I come from, after the partition has had a difficult time to preserve either the identity or the culture. I wanted to probably ask you to draw a comparison of how the legacies of Heer and Ranja has been preserved or been celebrated in both India and Pakistan. If you could draw a comparison, or if you can just tell how both the countries are celebrating it.
Yeah, so that's actually a very interesting question. I was thinking about this a lot. So, I mean, you've read the book. I'm not sure many people in this group have read the book. So, किताब के अंदर एक जो मैं comparison करता हूँ is between Waris Shah and Shah Waliullah. And Shah Waliullah is this writer from Delhi who is inviting Ahmad Shah Abdali to come and invade India. And his understanding of Islam is very different from Waris Shah. So he's saying that Islam is being corrupted by incorporating all these Hindu practices and pagan practices, and we need to purify our Islam, which is why political power is being taken away from us. And he's writing in Arabic, whereas Waris Shah's understanding of Islam is so much different. He's like, yeah, it's all like our Islam can take from Krishna, can take from Shiva and Ram and so on. So you have these two contrasting opinions. Now, even like so at the point that Waris Shah was alive, I feel like Shah Waliullah for a broader audience was irrelevant, because he was writing in Arabic. Like maybe the intellectuals and the elite of that time knew, but like Waris Shah was probably a celebrity around his time, because people knew his songs were being sung, Hiranja was being sung, and of course like that celebrity has increased over the years. Now, why am I mentioning this is because today in schools in Pakistan, Shah Waliullah is taught, and that's how I sort of grew up learning about. Well, my understanding of Islam was being shaped by that. So I grew up learning about Shah Waliullah because his understanding of Islam is essentially what the Pakistani state associates with, and Waris Shah is not taught at school, and I feel like that itself. So, अगर आज आप जाएं, especially Lahore में या किसी स्कूलों में, and you ask who Shah Waliullah is, everybody will be able to like, because वो उनको याद करवाते हैं, रटा लगवाते हैं, and they all will give you an entire essay on Shah Waliullah. And maybe like Waris Shah, they would not know more than one line. who Varisha is and what his philosophy is. And I feel like so from a top down point of view, I feel like the Pakistani state very much aligns with the ideology of Shah Waliullah. And for them, like Varisha's philosophical tradition and his understanding of Islam challenges their notion of nationhood. So he's not getting that kind of endorsement. On the other hand, agar aap folk level baat kare, like you just cannot, like no matter what the state does, like that folk love that people feel for Heer Ranja will just remain. Like I mean, I remember like this person who used to work for my father, completely like uneducated in the traditional way, that didn't go to school, and like he could sit there and read and recite the entire Varisha, he Ranja for you, and then he could also recite many other Sufi poetries, which I find like absolutely incredible. Like this is unbelievable culture this person holds, and he's incredibly cultured, who can read, who can sort of recite this whole, like, and he probably can't read, and but he can do that. I think that's the beauty of Hiranja, of Varisha, and many other folk literature is that it just remains alive in people's. It just connects with people in that many ways, and yeah. So so there's two ways how Pakistan views Varisha's legacy. That one is that's top down, where it's not really addressed, and it's a challenge to our understanding of nationhood. But I feel like at a folk level, it is very much alive. Like as I mentioned, like people say कि आप कुरान अगर नहीं पढ़ा तो कोई बात नहीं, आप हीर रांझा पढ़ लें, you will understand what Quran is all about. Like that is a big statement in a Pakistani context to make, so you can understand how much people love this literature.
Well, that's all the question I had from my part, but I'm sure the students with here have more questions. So probably you could just unmute and ask the question to Haroon.
Good evening, sir.
Arya, just 1 second. Could you please switch on your camera as well?
Sure, ma'am.
You could just remove me from the pin so that you can just ask. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Sir, from this interview, I've seen there is very symbolism is a lot there in this novel, in this book which you have written. So, like you have compared Ranja first with Prophet Yusuf and Krishna. I want to ask, what challenges did you face while writing this book? Because we live in a society which is very orthodox, and when it comes to religion, people are like very violent. So when some people who are like very obnoxious and very orthodox, when they'll see this context, because not everyone gets symbolism and what is symbolism. So how did you face and how did you write with so much like braveness, and that you can conquer this question?
Thank you, Ria, for that question. So I mean, firstly, like I write about religion, and I think like I've just like have been writing about it, and it's happening. So it will almost it's a natural journey for me. And I think I was sitting at my home, very comfortable in Lahore, writing about comparing Yusuf to Krishna. So I think there was no challenge for me as long as things were on my laptop. I mean, the book had just come out, and I feel like to be honest though, I think especially given the time, like there is a yearning for these kind of stories. I feel like that's where people are at. Like I mean, like there's a genuine, like I feel like, yes, I mean I think so essentially, I think because I mean of course like Pakistan experienced religious extremism and violence maybe slightly before India did. So we're like veterans in that regard. I feel like over the years, what I've realized, especially on social media and other things, like these voices are loud, they're obnoxious and they're loud, but I'm not sure that they necessarily reflect people's sensibilities. So a lot of times we think that everybody thinks like that because they're so loud, and their echo chambers they grow. But I feel like, especially in today's time, like there's more yearning and more need for people to read these stories. Like I mean, like I'll give you one example. Like I don't know, like I mean, if you're aware of my book Walking with Nanak, which once again is slightly like non-orthodox Sikh reading of Guru Nanak. And I think especially like writing that book, I was more scared because it was more of a direct sort of, like not a challenge, but like challenge to conventional perspective of history. But I feel like there was such a yearning. Like I mean, the book is so widely loved, and I'm absolutely flattered by all the love that it gets, especially from the Sikh community. So I feel like we think about these voices because they're so loud, but there is in today's time more so than ever. I feel like there's a yearning to really read about these stories and can connect.
Thank you, sir.
Probably maybe the next person can unmute and ask. Uh, Anyone of you can just unmute.
I think it's Saryu. I see your hand.
Hello, sir. My name is Saryu, and my question to you is that this novel of yours, it has an mind-blowing balance between imaginative fiction and historical analysis. So, how challenging has it been for you to achieve that balance? And how do you feel it will affect us as readers to get an insight into the life of Waris Shah or Heer and Ranjha for that matter?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so it was like it's actually my first proper book in fiction. So in many ways, I feel like I'm proud of this book more than I'm proud of any other book, because I don't know, there's something about creativity in fiction that just like makes you fall in love with literature more than maybe nonfiction can ever do. But I think the it was in because it's historical fiction, I feel like it's slightly easier for me to write, because that's the genre that I enjoy, that's the genre that I read and I really connect with. So the idea was, I mean, with Barisha, like I almost think about, okay, so I know where the novel is going to start. So for me, like that's very important, and I know where the novel has to end. And then broadly speaking, like I think of them as dots. So I know, okay, eventually Varsha has to reach here, and the story has to reach here. And within that, like I feel like I'm very free. I'm like, okay, I can take this and make him reach that space in in whatever forms way I want, and that's where creativity really comes to life for me. But I think for me, like having a start, having an end, and having some sense of what's going to happen just helps. And then everything is up for like anything. Like so, for example, like in this book, like Bulleh Shah's part, like I was not even thinking about having Bulleh Shah in the book and him interacting with Waris Shah. And I feel like that's just like I just started thinking about it and started writing it, and that became a figure that I started really enjoying. And I'm like, okay, maybe we can explore this more. And then even though like he comes in one part of the book, but I feel like his shadow just lurks throughout the book and throughout the discourse. So I think yeah, I really enjoy that part. Like just having like these small markers, knowing, thinking of them as dots, but then the lines that I make are my own, and that's when it becomes a lot of fun.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anyone else with the question? Okay, go ahead, Vidya.
Okay, hello, sir. This is Vidya. So, my question is more about the philosophical part. So, first of all, can you just separate or give me a distinction between the philosophical love and the divine love? Because nowadays, whenever I hear about love, I cannot make a distance. Like, I just feel this is all the philosophy. Like, where is the love? So, can you just first tell me what exactly the difference is? And then I'll ask my real question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
actually, that's actually a very, very relevant question. And I feel like Varisha was also very much part of this. So, agar aap kitab, I feel like the book is almost divided into two parts. And the first part is Varisha, the character of Varisha, trying to understand love through philosophy. So trying to understand, and I feel like वो distinction नहीं है between philosophy and religion and divine. Like for him, it's all the same. So I think once again those distinctions are very modern. And when Barsha is talking about philosophy, he's talking about religion. Like it's all interconnected. So the first part of the book is very much him intellectually understanding what divinity is, what philosophy is, and in the second part of the book, he goes to the shrine of Baba Farid, and then he actually starts doing service. So and I think for him, and then that's when he discovers divinity in that interaction with individuals. So for him, and then he realizes that you can have a philosophical understanding of God and divine and love, but if you don't experience that love in your interaction, that philosophical understanding is irrelevant. And I feel like that is the core once again of Bhakti Rivayat or and a philosophical and Varisha's philosophical tradition, that intellectual understanding sure could be important. I mean, could be important, but then if you don't have an interactive experience of that love through human interaction, then you don't understand divine. Like so emotional experience is very, very important, and that's why Bulleh Shah, for example, says that ilm bas kare ho yaar, ek alaf tere darkar. Like this intellectual knowledge will only take you to some point. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, the question was you almost answered the question as well, but still, I'll ask the question. So it was that love is meant to be complete when it is actually left incomplete. And we kind of read and reread and know it from almost all the history books or previous romance books or the books of divine love as well. So, sir, do you think is it true that love is complete only when it is incomplete, or is it the psychological makeup that we have created because of society, which is too difficult to, like we cannot make them understand? Is it because of that that love is left incomplete, or is it
Yeah.
actually that love is so difficult to be complete?
Yeah, I feel like unrequited love is a genre that is sold. I feel like it's there's a whole romantic image about that unrequited love is something which is more special. And I feel like, I mean, at some level, of course, like He Ranja is very much about forbidden love and unrequited love. And in fact, like in the book as well, like the Varisha, him falling in love, like I wanted that love to be unrequited because He Ranja ends as a tragedy. So I wanted to explain that at some level through his unrequited love, and that's where it comes from. But but I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. I feel like love, especially like someone thinking like one what is completed. Like I think that's itself like, is it a lifetime spent together? Like not necessarily. I think like for like I mean it's like so like like completion, like for them, for like Barisha Hiranja, like they are like Hiranja, like example, they are able to consummate their love. Like they're able to make love in the forest, and there's a whole sort of, and then Barisha very much like plays up that. So the sexuality about Hiranja is very much sort of actually what pisses off a lot of people because it's very vulgar in that way. And I feel like maybe that's love completed at one point. Like so what essentially the question is like where what do you mean by love completing? Like is it a monogamous love, like marriage that we're thinking about completed love, or is it like this moment? So even this the portion that I've read, for example, like Varisha experiences love for a few hours, and then he never finds that person ever again. And is that completed love? Like I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think there's just so much there's so many ways that we can answer that question, but also feel like romance, like we once again we think about Hiranja as a romance story, but like I don't know, that's not really my strength. Like I'm not a romance writer, and like this book is not romance at all. I feel like Hiranja is not romance at all. But yeah, so I'm finding slightly hard to answer that question, but yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, Antriksh, you wanted to ask something?
Good evening, sir. So my question is about that. What is the relevance or comparison or contrast you unraveled while considering this issue of writing the very work with that of the contemporary world? Is there any kind of degradation or upgradation or continuation of the themes, ethos, ethics, or any kinds of norms and notions which you find were there in the Varikisa and that of with today's contemporary world?
Sorry, so let's just sort of understand your question. So are you saying that um like the ethics, like challenges of exploring different ethics of time periods?
What are the comparisons or the what do you consider, is there a degradation or upgradation or continuation of those themes or ethos which were in that period with contemporary times? What
Okay.
were your stance on that?
Yeah. Okay. So I think I understand the question. So I'm going to try to answer that from what I understand. So I think that maybe like some of the parts were discussed. So for example, like what one thing that was new for me was that the gender roles were so different from that historical time period and from today. So I think so that's a big discontinuation that has happened. Um, and so like I mean, Hiranja characters are very different in some gender. I feel like then the religious sensibilities, like as I mentioned, that Varisha is very okay mentioning Gita and Quran in the same line, but we can't imagine that today. So that is something which is kind of like something which is very different from tradition. But then of course like Varisha in very much like Hiranja very much is loved by today's time. And I think that itself that is something that it's like there's a sense of continuation there for the language, for the literature. I don't know, like this is slightly not connected, but I feel like one also, like I mean, these books, this literature has taken a life of its own. So for example, like Amrita Pritam, for example, at Partition, referring to He Ranja, um, Varisha itself, like so essentially she's taken He Ranja and put it in the context of partition. and use that and violence the partition, which is something which is pretty remarkable. And then of course you have Sardar Uddham Singh, sorry, in England, like when he is on his death penalty, sorry, when his case is being read, he's asked that what religious book do you want to take your oath on, and he decides to do it on Heer Ranjha. And I think for him, like it goes on to show that Heer Ranjha beautifully brings together different religious traditions, and he is very much part of a communist leftist tradition, but then still like paying homage to Heer Ranjha. So you can see that he's bringing in his own interpretation. So I feel like at some level, people will be this literature essentially um, takes on their own life, and people bring in their own meaning depending on the political context. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but that's what I kind of understood.
So, so what relevance do you find of that text in today's world?
Yeah, I think for me, like the religious aspect of it, like gender, of course, is very important. But I feel like, especially today's time, like I just can't stop thinking about how Ranja is so inspired by Ram, and I'm like Ram today has become such a politically charged symbol used by different political groups for violence, and then suddenly you have, especially against Muslim community, and then you have Ranja, who's a Muslim symbol and a product of Ram. And so I think that for me, like, just once again blows my mind every time I start thinking about it. And I feel like that's something that really needs to be known more widely so that we can counter some of that propaganda and challenges.
I have another question. So, what's your countenance at the fact of this being Heer Ranjha and not otherwise? When we have other examples like Mirza Sahiba or Romeo Juliet, if I say, so why it is Heer Ranjha, not the other way, Ranjha Heer in that case?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, people have associated different meanings to it. That because this is part of the tradition. So Mirza Sahiban ke bare mein wo kehte hain ki it brings an end to traditional. So sorry to it brings an end to this love legend series that us Bari Punjab, so Soni Maiwal, this and that, which is why Mirza ka naam pehle aata hai, and this is a corrupted love story as opposed to Heer Ranjha love story, which is a pure love story. I mean, people have all kind of interpretations. I think it just rhymes better, and that's why it's used. And also, like Varisha is not calling it Heer Ranjha. I think Varish, like log kehte hain Varisha's Heer. So I mean the name is very is our name, and I think it's more of a rhyming thing than having more of any symbolic meaning. But again, I haven't really thought much more about it.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for your questions.
I think there are more students who want to ask. Ria once again wants to ask something, and then there are more hands.
Hello again, sir. Sir, I wanted to ask a question different from the book, apart from the book, sorry. I want to ask, like, you write religious books and you write more on religion, but being in Pakistan, where, like, I have less knowledge about Pakistan and you might have more, but it's that, like, Hinduism is a very minority state there, and, like, you have written on Shiva, and then you have in this book also have compared with Krishna, Ram. So how did you gain this knowledge living in in an Islamic country?
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
have written such a book. Hmm.
Yeah, like firstly, I don't live in Pakistan anymore, so I actually live in Canada. But that's not that's not the point. A lot of books that I wrote were while still in Pakistan. Like firstly, I mean, like you get books, you get everything. Like I think my library at the university had a lot of books on Hinduism. So I mean, so libraries will have that knowledge. Of course, a lot of stuff you find online as well. But you're right. Like I didn't have interaction with. So I think that maybe like the first Hindu that I ever interacted with was when I was doing my project, when I was doing ethnographic research with the Hindu minority in Pakistan. And there was like in my so growing up, like Hindu was always like somebody which was a figment of my imagination, or something somebody that I interacted with through Bollywood. Like, there was no interaction because you still find Christians, especially in Punjab. सिंध में फर्क है कराची में आपको मिल जाते हैं लाहौर में like my interaction was no, even with the Sikh community, like my first interaction happened much later when I started doing some work. And I think that's maybe part of the curiosity came from there. Like there is such a lack of knowledge, and even though this like Hinduism and Sikhism is such an important part of the area that I'm part of, there needs to be more knowledge. I think there's a natural, like almost felt like there's a part of me that I don't understand, and I need to understand this. So I think that's also a way of approaching like how I see my work is that I'm not I'm not researching on Sikhism or Hinduism or religions that are not part of my tradition. I'm actually searching more on Punjab, and I feel like that's very much part of my, like Guru Nanak or Shiva are very much part of my tradition. And I mean, one of the most sort of sacred temples of Shiva is in Pakistan, which is in my book. So I think yeah, do that. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, sir.
Let Avleen ask first, and then Antariksh can ask again.
Hi, good evening, sir. I just wanted to know what were the difficulties that you faced while writing this book, since you said that not much is written about Varisha's background. Plus, here is the only book that he wrote in his lifetime. So, what would you say about the difficulties that you faced?
I think well, like one of the biggest difficulty for me was essentially being afraid. Like I was afraid like there are people who understand Varisha's Hiranja so much better than I do, who've spent their entire life reading this, and I'm like, okay, so I am essentially writing this book and pretending to be an expert on Hiranja. And I just like I think there's a part of me that still is afraid that people who really understand the book might be like, who understand my understanding Hiranja might be like, or you've missed this part, or you've missed this part, or you've understood the symbolism wrong. So, for example, like there's different interpretations because it's a work of poetry. So when I read Hiranja first, my understanding was that Varisha was very critical of the Sikh missile that were emerging around that time. And that essentially pisses off many, of course, a lot of Sikh scholars are angry at Varisha for rightly so, that, like, why are you so critical of Sikh missile power and not so much so of other political power? But of course, there are other people who think that no, actually that's not true. Like Varisha was more favorable, and there's this nuanced line that he says here, and there's this nuanced line that's said there. So of course, like I mean, at the end of the day, like this is a work of poetry. Like Varisha Hiranja is a work of poetry, and poetry can be interpreted in so many different ways. So what I took from the book essentially was the religious composite culture that it presents, and that's something that aligns with my intellectual pursuit. But of course, somebody else reading Hiranja will pursue it very differently, and I feel like that. So that was a bit of a challenge. That just understanding that, okay, I'm reading this book in a particular way through my own lens and through my own political sensibilities, and somebody else reading it will interpret it completely differently. So it's less of a challenge, but like understanding that literature essentially can be read in so many different ways.
Also, I wanted to ask, like, this book of yours came after, like, your last book was in 2018, and this is like in 2024, and your previous books were like written in, I think, in 2 or 3 years. And I would ask why, like, this long time of 6 years?
Yeah,
Was it the research?
I also asked myself that question. I think to be honest, like if I'm being completely honest, I feel like when you're younger, especially when I was younger, like my first book came out when I was 28. So I think like the idea, that obsession to get published was so much there. Like I need to get my first book out there before I'm 30, and then my second book out there before I'm 32, whatever. Like so the focus was much more on getting published. And I think that was a life goal almost. But I think like once you grow older, you become, I guess, calmer. And I think for me now, the focus is much more on like quality. So I'm like, okay, so like, I mean, like if I'm being honest, like you pick up this book and you pick up my first book, and you will just see such a different qualitative writing. Like they're just fundamental. Like even like this book and last book, which came in 2018, like it's just like such a difference in the quality of writing, because I'm thinking about it so much more. So for this book, for example, like I thought about almost each and every word that went in there, because I really wanted to think about the quality of it. Whereas my previous books, like, was very different. So I think that's that. Then of course, like life had become more busy. Like I had to move countries. I've had a daughter recently, so I feel like my next book might even come like 8 years later. so many other things are happening in life. But I think also like I'm actually more obsessed about writing much more, thinking more about quality than numbers.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, like, what change did this book, or like writing this book, brought in your life as an individual?
I think, I mean, it's a tough question to answer, but I think so. I mean, also not necessarily the book, but around the time that the book came, like I mean, the book when I was writing the book, like my wife got pregnant. I think I had I had a daughter. It's my first child uh, before the book came out. So initially, when I wrote the acknowledgements, her name, my daughter's name was not there, so I had to rewrite it and then put her name there. But I think, especially like her birth and writing the book, which is a book about gender violence, I feel like I think about gender violence much more than I ever did. And I don't know if that's has to do with having a daughter, and that's also having to do with writing a book. And also, like, I mean, being a male, being a Sunni male in Pakistan, like, as privileged, like gender violence, like intellectually I can understand it, but like I don't have that lived experience of it. But I feel like, especially having a daughter, it's just like it feels different in some ways. Like I can't, like, I mean, it just like hits it almost like, because having a child is almost like being a part of you that's outside. So it's almost like gender violence almost becomes your story. And then, of course, like in this book, like her father kills the daughter, and just like, and I'm so glad I wrote that part before I had a daughter, because I'm not sure if I would have been able to after. So I think that, so those are two things that are completely, like, for me, like, they're together. So I think like I think about gender violence more, and I think it impacts me much more than perhaps it would have impacted me a few years ago.
Thank you, sir.
Just adding to Avleen's second question. So, Haroon, if let's say, I mean, you want to recommend these students to begin reading you from your entire oeuvre, so which book do you think they should start with? What would be your recommendation?
That's just a tough question, but I mean, but it has to be the latest one. So,
Latest
uh,
ones.
yeah, I mean, I had the privilege of meeting William Dalrymple once, and I was in Lahore, and I was such a big fan of his. So I took all his books with him, and I had like 5 minutes with him. So I'm like, tell me what your favorite book is, and he's like, listen, like, he told me, like, you're becoming a writer, so the thing that always you need to be keep in mind is that your favorite book is always your last book. Uh, and so yeah, so the book that I would recommend to everyone will be the latest book. And then, of course, like, I mean, I think Walking with Nanak is something which is very special for me.
Okay.
So after that, maybe you could read this or Imagining Lahore. The first two books, I feel like I was very young when I wrote this, so I'm not like now. If I read back some of the part, like, I feel like the writing could have been better. There's some parts that I feel like intellectually I feel a bit uncomfortable about. Maybe
But the subject which you dealt in Search of Shiva, I feel that's very, very important, because there you deal with the earliest origins, our origins. So basically with the Indus Valley. So currently, again, I mean, number of people here also and across the border in Pakistan also, people are interested once again to trace their roots, to trace their origins to Indus Valley. So I feel, I mean, those remnants of those uh, the Indus Valley, still the cultural aspect of it is still living in our two societies, Indian and Pakistani societies. I feel the book actually dealt with a very, very valid, relevant, and important question, very urgent question also.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. That means a lot. And I think also, like, the book is written in a very, like, travel log, fun, like you're
Yes,
hanging out with
travel.
friends. Like that
Uh,
was so very different from the later books.
so that could be called as non-fiction.
Yeah, it's non-fiction, it's travel. It's also like you have four people who are hanging out together and they're like having conversations. It's very like young people hanging out, but also like doing this fun travel and then writing about serious things. So
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, once again, the recommendation is the latest book. Start from
Okay.
there.
So do we have more questions? Okay, Vidya and Antriksh once again. So be brief, because we are slowly reaching our final endpoint also. Yes, Vidya, okay. Ratandeep, where are you? I am doing your job.
Hey, sir, this question might sound a little funny. I just It just came in my mind that do you think that story or the tale will be as divinely appreciated as it was done with the previous or the old story of Heer Ranja if the Heer Ranja were of today's time with all this technology and with all these distractions, I must say, or whatever, like, things that are happening in today's world, or we can say modern world.
So
So do you think that
your take on today's Heer Ranjas.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
I feel like the more complex our societies have become, in some ways, like our need for a simple story has also increased. Like, I mean, I was talking to somebody. Like, I'm a big movie buff, and Inception is my all-time favorite movie. I don't know. Have you seen Inception? Okay, awesome. Now, Inception, of course, is a very, very complex story which has multiple things. But like, how I feel like what really works for the movie is this really simple, beautiful love story that holds it all together. And you take away that love story, the simplicity of that love story. I don't think the movie will have as much of an impact as it does. So I feel like the more complex our stories have become, like even like I mean, of course, like Animal Abhi recently, I hear, which is also a very very complex movie, very strange. But like you can almost see this new genre of movies emerging, which is like what, we'll reduce everything to its bare simplicity. You have a good guy, you have a bad guy, and they're fighting, and that's what the whole story is about. And somehow it's doing well. Somehow that people are that genre is resonating. So I feel like there lies your answer. That it's a like the more complex our lives have become, the need to find a simple story, which is almost universal, has increased.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, Antariksh, please.
Sir, my question is, I may digress from the particular text, but if we consider in the general consensus, the factors of memory, identity, and violence, they are so heavily entwined with each other that we see in other texts that same plot is there. That violence and where violence plays a heavily imbuing role on memory and identity. So, don't you think that peaceful or harmonious entities could be that potent, or aren't they that potent to be entered in that plot of memory and identity?
Yeah, no, it's actually a very good question. You should think about. So here's the thing. I feel like because my wife Anam has done some work on partition, so a lot of my knowledge about violence and partition comes from there. I feel like violence becomes like it's such an overarching, overshadow thing that once violence comes into play, it overshadows everything. So, for example, अगर आप partition पे इस पे actually मुझे नाम भूल गया है, they've done some work. That if you think about partition, like people like 40 almost 50% of partition stories are rescue stories of people rescuing each other. But when we think about partition, we never think about those rescue stories. We only think about those violent stories because somehow like violence has that power. Like violence overshadows everything. आपके 10 अच्छी memories होंगी, but एक अगर violent memory होगी, that one violent memory overshadows every other memory. And I feel like, I mean, very small example, but very disconnected. कि अगर मेरी किताब के 10 अच्छे review आएंगे और एक बुरा review आता है, I think that बुरा review just overshadows everything. And I feel like, I mean, that's a bad example, but I think violence does that. So I think that's just way of understanding. Like, it does not mean that peace or these stories of sort of interharmonious are less connected or less important. Absolutely not. I think they give you a more reality. But we just have to like violence almost forms this ash that we have to peel through them to get to the truth, which is more complex, which is and where the core lies. So पार्टनरशिप में मैं एक बंदे से जब इंटरव्यू कर रहा था, so I mean डिस्प्लेसमेंट होती है, वायलेंस होता है, but अगर आप थोड़ा सा उसमें अगर आप और जाओ तो a lot of times, I mean I was talking to somebody in California and बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग मेरी बात हो रही थी कि वो बात कर रहे थे कि how his family was being forced to flee from Hassan al-Dal and just thinking about violence. And then while I was like asking him more questions, एक छोटी सी स्टोरी में आई कि हाँ अच्छा रास्ते में हमें मुझे याद है कि एक लड़का था जो हमें घर से पानी पिला रहा था while we were traveling, and it was very interesting. Like that, and he would never think about partition as a starting point of the story, but it becomes more about violence. उन्होंने पहले ये किया, वो किया, but ये भी किया, but this is not important. So almost like वो एक genre बन गया कि partition is violence, and violence because violence has that nature. Violence does that.
I think Vidya has a question. She has raised her hand. Vidya, if you could unmute yourself and ask the question.
No, sorry, sir. I forgot to turn it off.
Okay. So, ma'am, I think you're on mute.
So do we have more questions, or else I also wanted to ask something? I guess
No, ma'am.
Okay, let me ask them. So actually today on Netflix, a movie called Chamkila has been released. If you know about Chamkila, Singh Chamkila was a folk singer in 1970s, in 1980s, and he was very well known for very different reasons. He was highly popular, a superstar of Punjab in those times, and at the same time, he was known for writing lewd lyrics, for the profanity, for the obscenity in his lyrics. I wonder if you know about him.
Yeah, no, I don't. But I've seen the trailer. So in fact, मैं आसमा बात कर रहा था.
Yeah,
I'm going to watch the movie tonight.
So Imtiaz Ali has
Yeah.
directed the movie, and before the movie also, Chamkila was a very well-known figure, and he was assassinated. He was killed in broad daylight, he and his wife. So, but at the same time, on the other hand, Chamkila, after his death, he earned a kind of a reverence in the folk public like understanding, a certain sacred understanding in the folk minds. So Waris also, as you mentioned during your talk also, that Waris also is, he's quoted for certain lyrics which are considered profane, which are considered very obscene. And there are certain couplets with sexual innuendos in them. So can we actually say that the folk understanding of heroism, of religion, is much more liberal, much more fluidic than a structured moral code given by the religion?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
okay, so and in that only associated with this, in addition, so are these times suitable, more suitable, I would say, or maybe ripe enough for writing about our oral histories, about our folk heroes with certain new perspectives? Or are these times really very turbulent times in which art and history and literature, they are particularly the target? Or, I mean, there is a paradox. So
Yeah.
how do you understand this?
Yeah, no, thank you for that very insightful question. And I think these are essentially two main points. Like, firstly, yes, like folk and oral and uncodified religion, I feel like is um much more embracive, much more inclusive. So for example, like Varisha's idea, जो पहले भी हम बात थोड़ी सी आई है कि Varisha's idea of divine unity is expressed, like meeting with divine is expressed through sexual intercourse. Like that for him is like, that's what you've achieved divinity, which is like today, like you don't understand, like it's very hard to like comprehend, really, like, are you serious? Like, are you explaining divinity through sexuality? But that's
In
what he does.
short,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and that's what he does. Like, and then he's like, there's a whole page about this interaction, this divine interaction that is happening. And then people, yeah, you're right. Like, people have been very critical, especially the high culture people are very critical of Varisha, that this is too vulgar. Like you're catering to people's basic needs essentially. So like more criticism. Hey, but I think folk has that. Like folk has always been like, folk is not known for its super high end symbolism culture in that way. Like it's very out there symbolism, like very sort of. And I think वो एक आपको चीज मिल जाती है. And I think वो फिर उसके साथ uncodified religion. Like, I mean, मेरी किसी से I was doing this I did this little reel for Varisha, and somebody like on my Facebook got pissed off saying that this is not true Islam, etc., etc. And I'm like, what is true Islam? Like, what is true religion? Like, true religion is something, and that's a very, once again, अगर उसकी roots देखें, वो linked होती है with colonial state. कि भाई जो किताबों में लिखा हुआ है या जो उस religion की जो elite कहते हैं, that is true religion. How millions of people have experienced that religion is not true religion. Like Varisha, like essentially, like millions of people experienced Islam and Hinduism and their religious identity through Varisha's Heer. Like, why is that not true religion? And why is essentially a Maulvi's interpretation or a priest's interpretation of religion true religion? Like, why is that? Why should we give it more credence to that? So essentially, this is a whole. So this also like folk. There's always a looking down upon folk, and the more educated, essentially, the more educated, the more elite you get. The idea is that you move away from this folk and this uncivilized culture. Ek to wo part tha. And second, I think in today's time, like, unfortunately, I feel like what is also happening is that people are catching on to this sort of growing intolerance. Like, I mean, you look at some of the top 10 book sell that sells in India. I was looking at the Amazon list, and unfortunately, you will find books that are reinforcing stereotypes, or sort of catering to that audience, and that certainly making it even more intolerant. So yes, I mean, art and culture, like, can go both ways. Like, I feel like art and culture also plays a very, very important role, and sometimes creating a more violent society. Like, I mean, Hitler's Germany had a great art and culture environment. So, like, I mean, and that's, unfortunately, I feel like that's happening. Like, you had some very, very problematic books being published, movies coming out. So for some reason, like, my social media algorithm thinks that they should cater to my writing sensibilities. So I get a lot of sometimes these extreme posts. But yeah, like, I mean, so I think that it can go both ways. And unfortunately, like, it really breaks my heart to see sometimes the kind of books and movies that are top 10 or top 100 and are being watched.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Ratnadeep.
Thank you so much for taking your time and speaking. Actually, it's been such an honor to not only read your book, but also host you for the conversation. And thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
We had that formal vote of thanks also. I've been waiting for that.
Oh, sorry.
So, yeah. So thank you so much, Haroon. It was so nice talking to you. I'm very sure my students also, they would have been, they must have learned new perspectives to read literature, and they must have enjoyed also talking to you, to a young writer, if they are aspiring themselves also to write someday. And I particularly appreciate your exploration of love, like, from a different perspective. So Heer Ranjha, yes, we agree that they have become the folk understanding of devotion. Basically, they are the folk understanding of devotion. But then devotion for the mortal is love, and devotion for the immortal may be called as faith, may be called as religion. So Heer Ranjha lie on the boundary of what I captured from whatever you said. Heer Ranjha lie on the meeting ground of these two kinds of human ardor, or maybe human love in the form of devotion to Almighty, and love in the form of, like, ishq hakiki, ishq majaji. Then they also, Heer and Ranjha, and figures like Heer and Ranjha, as just now we talked about Chamkila also, we actually have a samadhi of Chamkila in Punjab. Similar feeling sometimes people convey for Sidhu Moosewala also. So, in fact, they provide access to common, ordinary people to the domain of the divine, which is otherwise, it is in the clutches of the priesthood. And the priesthood in all religions somehow creates such an aura around the divine, around God, that he becomes inaccessible to the ordinary people. He's just a distant figure, like the Miltonic God in the Paradise Lost. So this is the reason that common people, they create their own spaces of faith around these folk heroes, and in a way they become so that is the more liberal democratic tradition of religion amongst the common people, very different from the mainstream structured religion. And yes, so instead of an authority figure, we want to have our divine, our God amongst these common people who are from amongst us. So this discussion was very enlightening indeed. We had 2 hours, was it 2 hours? Yes, 2 hours, 1.5 hours of very fruitful time. A number of insights we learned from you, and I hope that in future also we'll get to listen more to you, and my students would read your version of Heer Ranjha. And definitely I feel that we will get more opportunities to read you and maybe to talk to you. So thank you so much on the behalf of Guru Nanak Dev University, our literary club, on behalf of the complete teaching fraternity, student fraternity. I pay my heartfelt thanks to you that you are here amongst us. Thank you so much. And thanks to Ratan Deep also, that he conducted it so well. He organized everything. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And
Ratnadeep, of
just if I
course.
could plug in the
Yeah.
book, by the way. So the book is available on Amazon and Flipkart. You can buy a copy. I'm sure the distribution have reached Amritsar as well, the local bookstore. So I'm sure you might find it there. Otherwise, you can just find it on Amazon and Flipkart. So here's a copy.
Thank you so much. Means so much to me. Thank you so much. Right. Take care.